As Christy said, I direct an organization called the Campus Suicide Prevention Center of Virginia. Our job is to provide college campuses with consultation, resources, print materials, support for creating comprehensive prevention plans. We essentially work with campus planners. We work with all the folks who are behind the scenes trying to provide a safer, healthier community for the students. So we're really about supporting the people. We help the people who help the people is what we do in our program. We are really very much behind the scenes trying to help schools create all sorts of resources to help keep their students safe. I think one of the challenges we face as communities is when we're dealing with complex problems like suicide, risk for suicide, what kinds of things do we do that will help us keep each other safe? And I think I wanted to start by sort of asking that question. What do we do? Where do we start? Who do we ask? Who do we talk to if we want to create safer communities for ourselves? Now, in my case, it's campus communities, but it can be a church community. It can be a regional community. It can be a city. If we want to create safety and a better, healthier place to live for folks within that community, what kinds of stuff do we need to be thinking about? And I guess the first thing I want to suggest to you is that we already know a good bit about how to do that because we've done it for other complex problems. And I'll give you some examples, and then I'll talk about what I think is involved. When I was young, which wasn't all that long ago, but when I was in high school, let's say, I was in high school in the 70s. When I was in high school, if someone got drunk and got in their car and drove and hit someone and killed them, people knew it was bad. They knew that person shouldn't have done that. But basically, the collective thinking was, what are you going to do? He was drunk. I mean, it was sort of considered a kind of an inevitable tragedy that we just were going to have to put up with. And that wasn't that long ago. That was what, 35 years ago that we have changed our thinking. We don't think that way anymore about what it means to get in your car and drive drunk as being kind of an, oh well, that was really sad, but it's not really your fault because you were drunk. We don't do that anymore. Another example, when I was younger, even when I was an adult working, my background is in school settings, even when I was a young adult, the issue of child abuse was kind of lost in this fuzzy, we don't really want to interfere with people's rights to raise their children the way they believe is appropriate. And really, if that's how they choose to discipline their children, I mean, who am I to say? And I'm just sort of going to pretend nothing's happening and hope that everything turns out okay. We don't do that anymore either. So over not all that long a period of time, 35, 40 years or so, we've changed a lot of things about the way we think about how we can plan and implement strategies to keep each other safe, to help each other stay safe and stay well. It hasn't been that long that we've been talking about how to do that for suicide risk. It really, in this country, 12, 15 years maybe. 15 years ago, I was a school psychologist. Again, that's my background. We were told not to bring it up. It just wasn't something that they felt was safe to talk about collectively. And ironically, I think the reason for that was the same as the reason for us today having open conversations about how to change our thinking and keep people safe. I think the reason for not talking about suicide was to prevent suicide. I think it was a fallacy. I think it was a mistaken belief that not talking about suicide is the way to prevent suicide. So the intentions were pretty much the same as they are now, to reduce risk for suicide. But one of the things I think we've learned is that as communities, we have to find safe and healthy ways to talk about suicide, to plan, to strategize. Okay, so here's what I think is involved in helping a community begin to tackle a complex problem like that? First of all, I think you bring key people together. So on a college campus, that would certainly be all the people you'd first think of, like the counselors, and the people in student services, and the people in residential life. And then there are all these other folks that really need to come to the table too, because they have information and insights that the group needs. Like people in administration. I mean, they're the ones that really make things happen and fund things. Campus security certainly knows a lot of stuff that nobody else knows. People who do academic advising or career counseling, they know an awful lot of stuff about what kinds of things that students experience that make life hard, that may or may not be about suicide, but they have perspectives that the rest of us need. And there's one other big group of people that we need at the table. Yes, yes. Because when people your age, of any age, and I say this to all of you, so if you're 22 or if you're 52, people of all ages go to their friends first. Family is a close second. And all the formal resources that we have in place that we'd love them to use, they're way down the list. People go to the people who are in their everyday lives first, regardless of their age. So in a college setting, who do folks go to first? Your friends, absolutely. The first people to know that something's wrong are typically the people who are closest to you. By the time a person who's at risk for suicide gets to a professional, chances are there are half a dozen, 8 people who already knew something was wrong, maybe were already worried, maybe didn't know what to say or do, maybe were really confused about what it meant to be a loyal helper, a loyal friend. I mean, on one hand, you know, she's saying, don't tell anybody. And I want to be a good friend, but on the other hand, this is really scary and I don't want her to be hurt either. And on the other hand, I think somebody else ought to know. I think somebody else could help. That's a struggle people have all the time, again, regardless of age. And so helping people think about those kinds of things ahead of time, helping people prepare ahead of time for how they might respond to a situation like that, is one of the goals of our trainings that we offer, because it's so hard to think clearly when you're in the middle of it. And with that in mind, I have to ask about, just a show of hands for experience in the room, how many of you have at one point been worried about somebody you care about? You don't have to know if it was about suicide or not, but you've been worried about someone you care about. Holy cow, that's like most of the room. Maybe that's why you're here. How many of you have already been a helper to somebody who you knew was at risk for suicide? Wow, put your hands up really high and let's look around. You've already been a helper to somebody who was at risk for suicide. Wow, that's pretty powerful. I don't know what you did. I don't know how you handled it. You probably did the best you could with whatever you had, and then wondered later if you did a good enough job. And that's kind of how most people do it. They do the best with what they have in those moments. There are things that we can do, my organization, but collectively, that we can do to help communities make that all go better. And some of it has to do with how we prepare individuals to do this kind of thing. And some of it has to do with how we prepare systems to support one another. I'm going to talk a little bit about the kinds of things individual people can do. The first thing that you all can do, starting now, is to help change the conversation about what it means to have a mental illness, what it means to have the most common form of mental illness as a mood disorder. More and more we're finding better and better ways to treat mood disorders with the right treatment package. And I say package because any chronic illness involves a treatment package. Anybody here diabetic or have somebody in your life who's a diabetic person? Okay. You know what the treatment package looks like. It's some sort of monitoring over time. It probably involves some sort of medication, but maybe not. There is a plan for eating well. There is a plan for getting just the right amount of exercise without too much exercise. There is a plan for getting enough sleep. Okay, that's what treatment looks like for other chronic illnesses. Somehow we're not quite there yet for mood disorders. We'll get there. Changing the conversation about mental illness, treating it like an illness, treating it like a chronic illness, and helping people realize that it's important to get help. If you break your leg, you don't limp around on it for weeks at a time, pretending you're okay when you're in terrible pain. I don't know why we do that for mental illnesses, but we do. We're not there yet. I think the difference between the two is stigma. So one of the things we can all do is help change the conversation about mental illness, and everybody here can begin there. Educate yourselves. Go online and read something that you know is a reputable source. If anybody here is interested in the biology of emotional illness and the biology of emotional wellness, I'll recommend a book to you. It's called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. And it's got a funny title, but it's a great book. There's some things systems can do, too, to change the way we deal with risk for suicide. We can provide lots of different kinds of resources for people who are already affected, whether by someone else's behavior or by their own illnesses or their own thoughts. And we know that there's no one-size-fits-all. Some people will use counseling centers, some people probably won't ever use counseling centers, and so for us to provide a range of resources, knowing that different people will use different modalities to help themselves stay well. That's one of the things that we can do to change communities. We can also provide lots of different trainings, like the kind Christina Benton mentioned, that help the average Joe know a little bit more about how to intervene, how to identify and step up and have a conversation with somebody, so that we can help each other stay safe even through crises. We know that suicidal crises tend to be fairly short, and getting people through that intensely difficult time often makes the difference. And oftentimes, if the help and the change are there, people don't go back there. But getting through that period of time that might be 5 minutes long, that's kind of crucial. I think I've run out of time here. So in general, the way communities make change for complex problems is they bring together people, they get good data to drive planning, they think in terms of multiple strategies used over time. So many people, many strategies, and many years. And that's really kind of the scale of work that we're talking about to make lasting change. Thank you.